Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Pagani design PD-1709. This watch is available from Trendy Men's Watch Store on AliExpress for €150. So firstly, let's look at the box that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the other items one gets with the piece. So the watch comes in this familiar black Pagani design cardboard watch box. One removes the lid. There's a piece of foam protecting the watch in shipping, and the watch sits on a piece of foam inside a foam cutout panel as one would expect. So although basic, it does suffice in protecting the watch in shipping. I think it's perfectly acceptable to use this basic cardboard watch box, bearing in mind it's a low tier price point piece. With the watch, one gets this branded microfiber polishing cloth. I always think it's a nice touch to get a branded microfiber polishing cloth, irrespective of the price point of a piece. This is the plastic guarantee card. As you can see, the reverse isn't filled in, but I'm pleased to report that the watch is covered by the usual 12-month international guarantee, which is very reassuring. And lastly, one also gets this owner's instruction manual. Although basic, it does have clear, concise diagrams, and the instructions are in English. It details the operation of the movement used, which is the Miyota caliber 8215, so a very useful read if you're unfamiliar with the movement used. So, with regards to the specification of the piece, this is the Pagani design PD-1709. The watch is clearly an homage to the Tudor black bay steel, and it has very similar proportions. 41mm case diameter. It has a lug-to-lug measurement of 50.2mm, a thickness of 14mm, and a lug width of 22mm. The riveted oyster-style bracelet tapers from 22mm at the lugs down to the 2-button push clasp. Good foam resistance to the 2-button push triggers. The clasp is signed to a high standard with Pagani design engraved. Now, there are some criticisms to the clasp. There are only 3 micro adjustment holes. I think it would be further improved with 4 micro adjustment holes because it doesn't have a glide lock or ratcheting mechanism, so therefore it's difficult to fine tune the length of the bracelet, even though it does have half links either side of the bracelet itself. So I think that really there is room for improvement. Now, the other thing I draw criticism to is the ends of the clasp are not finished to a good standard. As you can see, they have marked the ends of the bracelet. If I deploy the diver's extension link, you can see that this is a brand new watch and it already has scuffs on the end links in the bracelet. And it also has scuffs on this side, as you can see. If I tilt it in the light, you can see that the end link is also scuffed on this side. The reason for that is the ends of the clasp are not deburred satisfactorily. They actually have sharp edges, and what's happening is when the clasp is closed and it rubs against the end link, as you can see, it then scuffs it, and this is on a brand new piece. It's wholly unacceptable. Same case with this one. The end link rubs against the sharp edges which aren't deburred satisfactorily in the end. So I'll just demonstrate it to you. As you can see, what happens is the sharp edges which haven't been deburred, they rub against the end link and immediately it's marked here, and this is on a brand new watch. Now, the other cross-cutting measure, which is a disappointment, is the pressed metal diver's extension link. I actually think it would be better not to use a diver's extension link if they're going to use this abhorrent pressed metal extension link, because it is just poor quality. I'd like to see a solid milled stainless steel diver's extension link as per the PD-1661 or the PD-1662, which are better quality. And bear in mind, this isn't an inexpensive Pagani design watch. This isn't a PD-1661 costing circa €70. This is €150. And to see that kind of pressed metal clasp at this price point is wholly unacceptable. Right, so with regards to the rest of the specification, double dome sapphire crystal, but there is a clear cross-cutting measure. There is no AR coating on the underside of the double dome sapphire crystal, and as you can see, when I tilt the piece at an oblique angle in the light, it is highly reflective. There's a lot of glare, there's a lot of reflection to the silver applied indices and the silver snowflake hands. Although it's a matte black dial rather than a glossy black dial, which is more reflective, it is highly reflective due to the lack of the AR coating. As you can see, it is difficult to read because of its highly reflective nature. So it really would benefit from the use of clear anti-reflective coating on the underside, but the double dome sapphire crystal is very aesthetically pleasing and it does complement the low profile coin edge finish bezel. So I like the concentric brushed satin finishing to the stainless steel bezel insert. Usually with watches they either have an aluminium bezel insert or alternatively ceramic. The brushed satin finishing to the stainless steel bezel insert makes a refreshing change, and it does a very good job because bearing in mind this is an homage to the Black Bay steel, which has a stainless steel bezel insert rather than aluminium. So it's finished to a good standard. The minute ticks and the Arabic numerals are inlaid with matte black paint to a high standard, and I like the contrasting inlaid red triangle, which adds interest to it. Coin edge finishing to the solid stainless steel bezel. The teeth to the coin edge finishing are done to a high standard. Mirror polishing is good. So let's test the bezel action. 120 click unidirectional bezel, as one would expect. Light resistance to it. The clicks feel even all the way through the 360 degrees of rotation, but however there is a negative. There is significant backplay, 1 to 2 clicks of backplay. I'll just test it in all 4 quarters. Backplay there, backplay there, backplay there, and we've got backplay there. So the problem is the backplay is all the way around the 360 degrees. Now I'll check it for lateral side to side play, and there is slight lateral side to side play as well. So the problem is the backplay and the lateral side to side play, they compound the problem of the sloppy bezel action. I'll test the bezel alignment. And also we've got poor bezel alignment. The bezel doesn't align correctly. The Lume pip and triangle at 12 o'clock don't align correctly with the 12 o'clock index on the dial, the triangle on the dial. So I'll just test it a couple more times just to confirm this, that the alignment is incorrect. Slightly to the left. I'll test it one more time. Slightly to the left again. So this is very disappointing because we have 3 issues here. We have lateral side to side play, back play, and we also have incorrect bezel alignments. These are fundamentals that a watch brand has to get correct regardless of the price point of the piece. Bezel alignment really is something that one has to get right at any price point, and I think this is a major disappointment to this piece. The poor bezel action, the poor quality control, the poor build quality. It's a very sloppy bezel action. So although it does feel light, the resistance of the clicks is good all the way through the 360 degrees. There is consistency in the ratcheting mechanism. The alignment is incorrect, and really the most disappointing aspect of it is the lateral side to side play compounding the back play. So with regards to the screw down crown, solid stainless steel, signed to a high standard with the Pagani design brand emblem, coin edge finished. Let's test the action. Feels gritty, it's not silky smooth. This is a disappointment. Now, Pagani design are fully capable of producing well executed crown actions. I've reviewed a lot of Pagani design watches, and the PD-1661 and the PD-1662 have outstanding bezel action, very, very smooth, silky smooth operation. The thread feels gritty, it doesn't feel smooth. One can feel friction, one can feel resistance, so that's evident that there's poor quality control, there's poor machining. When they drill and tap the crown and also thread the external thread on the crown tube, the threads aren't cut cleanly. There's clearly burrs on the threading, and that gives friction between the internal thread of the crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. So it doesn't feel smooth, there is resistance, it feels gritty, it's unpleasant. Has a characteristic pop. The caliber 8215 pushes the winding stem out of the movement. So in the first position, it's the manual wind position, and one can manually wind the crown to top up the movement to its maximum 40 hours. So it is a pleasure to manually wind it. One can feel the resistance in the mainspring gradually build up as one manually winds it to its maximum 40 hours. Pulling it out to the first click position is the quick set date complication, and as you can see, looking closely at the date window at 3 o'clock, you can see the quick set complication works as one would expect. Pulling it out to the final click position is the time setting position. Now the Miyota caliber 8215 has less resistance in the gearing. It takes lighter resistance to rotate the hands into the time setting position. So if you're used to the Seiko NH35A, you'll find it takes some getting used to because the 8215 has less resistance. Now one negative to the caliber 815 is, as you can see, the second hand doesn't hack. It continues to sweep around the dial, even though I've pulled out the crown fully to the time setting position. The Miyota 8215 doesn't have hacking, and that is a major negative to the watch. One cannot set the time precisely to the second because one cannot stop the second hand dead. It continues to run. Pushing it back in restarts the movement, and I'll test screwing it back down. Again, it doesn't pick up immediately. The threads feel gritty and it's a poor pickup. The interface between the internal thread and the external thread of the crown, they just don't align very nicely. So disappointing crown action, and it really is a disappointment from Pagani Design, because as I've discussed on the PD-1661 and the PD-1662, the crown execution is outstanding. It's very smooth and it's something I really like about those watches. So it's a shame they didn't get it correct on this PD-1709. With regards to the case finishing, the longitudinal brushed satin finishing to the flanks is done to a good standard. It is smoother. There's finer brushed satin finishing to earlier versions of their Black Bay homages. I've previously reviewed several of them. The PD-1709 does have better case polishing, as you can see. The mirror polishing to the large chamfers on the edges of the case, they mark the transition between the tops of the lugs and the flanks. They are mirror polished to a flawless standard on all four chamfers. So they have finished the case to a good standard, and it is very aesthetically pleasing. Now, with regards to the end links and the bracelet, beautiful luster to the 316L grade stainless steel brushed satin finishing, so it does look nice, but however there is a negative and I want to clarify it. The solid female pivoted end links are a poor fit to the case. If you look at the profile of the female pivoted end links, they don't match the profile of the tops of the lugs very well. There's a step, there's a lip, it doesn't fit flush. If you look, there's actually a ridge, there's an edge to the inner portion of the lug. So the profile of the end link doesn't match the profile of the case. If I turn it round to the other side, you can see that it looks different. So it doesn't fit very well. The end links aren't a good fit to the case when I rotate them. If you look at both sides, the profile of the end link doesn't match the profile of the case. It looks like the end links are made to fit a different case than the one used. So very poorly executed. Now there's another negative, and this is a major negative I want to bring to your attention. One would normally say that female pivoted end links are good. They are better than male end links because they shorten the effective overall lug-to-lug measurement, which on this case is long at 50.2 millimeters. Now they do articulate, but there is a problem. The rivets, the inner rivet on the end link, catches the inside of the lugs. So there's actually resistance. One has to manually manipulate the female pivoted end links into position. They don't naturally articulate, they're not smooth. As you can see, there's resistance. Both rivets are too high profile, so they catch. And this is the problem on both sides. The end links are tight. As you can see, the end links in the bracelet with the rivets, if you look at the rivet there, it should articulate freely, but it doesn't. One has to move it, and it's very stiff. It doesn't move easily. And that's the same on both sides. So this negates the benefits of using female pivoted end links because they don't move freely, which is the purpose of using female pivoted end links. Really, Pagani Design could have fixed this problem quite easily by simply machining the rivets to a lower profile on the ends of the end link, as you can see. And that would mean that they would slip easily in between the lugs, but they don't. They catch it. So poor build quality, poor quality control, poorly executed. There's yet another problem with this bracelet, and I'm going to detail it to warn you about it. The rivet links in the bracelet articulate freely, as you can see. No resistance, they move freely, good articulation as one would expect. But either side of the clasp there are two screw pins rather than rivets, and that means that you can remove two links on this side and two links on this side to size the bracelet as one would expect. But the problem is with the screw pins is the screw pin links are stiff. If you look, they don't articulate freely. One has to again manually move them into position, and if one kinks the bracelet like this, you can see it doesn't move because the screw pins compress the outer links to the center link so tightly they don't allow the bracelet to articulate. As you can see, it should pull straight, but it doesn't. One has to manually push it into position. The same with both sides. I'll just demonstrate it. If I kink the bracelet like that, it doesn't straighten. When I pull it, it doesn't pull straight and flat. One has to manually push the kink out of the bracelet. Now if you look at the rivet ends, they articulate freely. That's the difference, you see. There's no friction. The outer links aren't compressing the center link, and therefore the rivet pins aren't compressing the links. They allow the links to articulate on both sides. So the pins used in the rivets work very well. They don't compress the outer links too much. But the two screw pins on this side of the clasp and the two screw pins on this side of the clasp, which are removable, they don't work very well. As you can see, if I kink the bracelet, it doesn't straighten. So overall, this is a very poorly executed bracelet because we have the same problem with the two rivets catching the case. As you can see, that doesn't allow for articulation. So I'm just going to put it on wrist and then you'll fully see what the problem is. What we have is a bracelet that kinks both at the female pivoted end links, they're stiff, and then we have two, as you can see, if you look at the kink there, it's not pulling flat as it should do. One has to manually articulate it. So we've got two stiff links here, and we've got stiff female pivoted end links either side of the case. So it gives a very uncomfortable, very disappointing fit. And when you add those two problems together, the stiff female pivoted end links and the stiff two links either side of the clasp, it compounds the problem. It makes a very uncomfortable bracelet. So very disappointing. Now with regards to the fit, it's a large piece, it wears with wrist presence and it also wears with heft. 175 grams with all the links in the bracelet, so it is a heavy piece. If you're a collector with a small wrist, you are going to find this to be too heavy and to wear with too much wrist presence for comfort. Now, although it's 41mm, it actually wears more like a 42, and I'll explain why that is. There is actually an overhang. The coin edge bezel projects proud of the flanks of the case. So the bezel actually is 42mm, even though the flanks of the case measure 41. So it wears like a 41 due to the bezel being larger than the case. The taper of the lugs is very good, down to the 22mm lug width, and the 22mm bracelet does taper very well down to the clasp. It does balance the 41mm head of the piece, but 175 grams is very heavy. There are tall slab sides to the flanks of the case. It's 14mm, including the double dome sapphire crystal, so it's not easily going to slip underneath a shirt cuff if you wear business shirts, and this is a problem with the Black Bay itself, the tall slab sides, so that's something to bear in mind. Really, this is best suited to collectors with a larger wrist of 7 to 8 inches. If you are a collector with a smaller wrist of 6 to 7 inches, you are going to find this to be too heavy and to wear with too much wrist presence. It's too long at 50.2 lug to lug and too tall at 14mm. But having said that, it is an aesthetically pleasing piece. The brushed satin finishing to the stainless steel bezel inserts and also the silver snowflake hands are very aesthetically pleasing. It's a good looking piece, but it's just very disappointing with the lack of articulation in the female pivoted end links and the stiff links in the bracelet. Right, so let's do a lume test and we'll see how the lume performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to its absolute peak. Now firstly, I just want to show you something before I do my lume test. If I hold my UV LED torch, you can see there is a mismatch between the lume on the snowflake hands and the lume on the applied indices. It looks like they've used C3 Luminova on the applied indices, which is green. On the hands it looks like BGW9, but it's not Super Luminova, it's Luminova. So the hands are blue, but the applied indices are green. So there's a colour mismatch, but I'll charge it up to its absolute maximum nonetheless, and we'll see how it performs when it's at its absolute peak. Right, so that's now fully charged. Now the curious thing is, even though the lume is different coloured on the hands and the indices as I've showed you, when they're fully charged they do appear to emit the same colour lume of C3 Luminova. But however, one can see the mismatch. If you look at the snowflake hands, the lume doesn't appear to be glowing as brightly, and what I think they've done to boost up the emission of the lume is they've mixed some BGW9 into the C3 on the snowflake hands, and that's why we've got that colour mismatch. When I held my UV torch over the hands, you could see that they were glowing blue and they mismatched the green colour of the applied indices, but when fully charged, because of the mix of the lume, they appear green. But the hands are fading faster than the applied indices, so this is weak performance. It's disappointing. It's clear that this is C3 Luminova rather than being Super Luminova, and it's a clear cost-cutting measure. I would describe this lume performance as okay, but it is disappointing. There is room for improvement on it. It's fading fast and it's not glowing very brightly. Particularly on the snowflake hands, it's very weak. So that's something to bear in mind, the poor lume performance. Right, so let's discuss the movement used. Now, previous versions of Pagani design watches used the Seiko NH35A, which is a reliable, well-proven movement, and I'll explain why they've now changed over to using the Miyota 8215 as an alternative to the Seiko NH35A. Due to a COVID outbreak in Malaysia, there was a shortage of movements in China, and that increased the wholesale price of Seiko NH35A movements. The NH35A is made in 2 plants by Seiko. They have a plant in Japan and also a plant in Malaysia. And the Chinese watch brands use the Malaysian-made NH35A. So there was a shortage of supply, the wholesale prices increased, and brands such as Pagani Design decided to use an alternative movement, and they switched over to using the Miyota 8215. San Martin had a similar problem, and they have changed over to using the Epson Caliber YN55A as an alternative. So the Miyota 8215 is a reliable, well-proven workhorse movement which is made in Japan, but I personally don't regard it as being equal quality to the Seiko NH35A. It has 21 joules, it runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 3 Hz. Now, it has hand winding, as I've demonstrated, but it doesn't have hacking. So the lack of hacking is a major negative. Another negative to the Miyota 8215 is it has a noisy rotor, and the rotor is only unidirectional, it's not bidirectional. So although it does rotate both clockwise and anti-clockwise, the rotor only winds the movement in one direction unidirectionally when it rotates anti-clockwise, so it's not as efficient as bidirectional winding rotor movements, and that is again another disappointment. 40-hour power reserve is perfectly acceptable, and it has a stated accuracy of -20 to +40 seconds per day, which is the same as the Seiko NH35A. So it's a lower cost alternative to the Seiko NH35A, and it lacks hacking, and it also has a noisy rotor. So these are the negatives I want you to consider. Now, with regards to accuracy, -20 to +40 is a rather wide accuracy range. This one has been regulated to +12 seconds per day, which is well within the -20 to +40 stated accuracy, but +12 seconds per day isn't impressive, and really I regard that as disappointing, because if this had a Seiko NH35A, it could well have accuracy of ±10 seconds per day or better, and that really would be more impressive. So lastly, let's test the bezel action again, because I want to see how it performs. I'm just going to check the alignment 3 times again, because I want to confirm the alignment is incorrect. Yes, it's to the left, so I'll just check it another couple of times. Again, it's to the left, and I'll check it one final time, because I like to be consistent in my reviews. If I'm going to be critical about a watch, I want to be absolutely certain that I'm giving it fair criticism and not biased. So yes, again, it's off to the left. So very poor bezel action. So lastly, I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch should meet 2 criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So the price point of this watch is €150. Now, there is an 11/11 sale, and I fully expect that €150 price to be discounted heavily during the 11/11 sale. But however, at €150, which is the current selling price, I consider this to be poor value, and I also consider it to be poor quality. The build quality, the quality control, and the execution of this watch throughout are disappointing. So I'll just outline the disappointments to keep them fresh in your mind. Poor fit to the case of the solid end links. As you can see, the rivets catch on the case. Poor articulation. We also have stiff links in the screw pin links, as you can see, on both sides of the clasp. The clasp is poorly executed. Cost-cutting measure of the pressed metal clasp, and as you can see, we have a brand new watch with marks on the end links because the ends of the clasp are sharp with burrs which dig into the end links on both sides. As you can see, there are also marks, and this is on a brand new watch, wholly unacceptable. So the finishing on the clasp is poor. The pressed metal clasp is a cost-cutting measure, and really it's very disappointing. Stiff links, as you can see, and we've got the problem of the friction of the female pivoted end links. Poor bezel action, back play, lateral side side play, incorrect alignment. The crown execution is also poor, gritty threading, so again disappointing. So overall I'm going to declare it a poor quality watch, and I'm also going to declare it poor value, and therefore I cannot recommend it to you for your consideration. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Pagani design PD-1709. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you very much.